Welcome back. You are tuning in to Traders Nation. My pleasure to have with us here today Kate Kelly, author of Street Fighters, The Last 72 Hours of Bear Stearns, the toughest firm on Wall Street. Kate, welcome to Traders Nation. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Good, good. The shocking fall of Bear Stearns in March 2008 set off a wave of global financial turmoil that continues to ripple today. How could one of the oldest, most resilient firms on Wall Street go so far astray, and it had to be sold at a fire sale price, Kate?
You know, it was a shocking come down for this firm, as you suggest, and this firm had been in business for 85 years. They were actually known for great risk management. The guy who was really their culture carrier for a number of years, Ace Greenberg, used to come up and hold cold sweat meetings with traders on the floor. He had guys that he called ferrets, who were literally spies that would look over people's shoulders and see how much risk they were taking on. He had this philosophy of selling losing positions, you know, the minute you realized they were losers.
Right.
So it was astonishing for this firm to face this turnaround, but I think they, like a lot of others, got caught up in the euphoria of the bull market and the housing market. They had a huge hand in the mortgage area. They were arguing among the traders with people like Ace Greenberg over whether or not they should sell their mortgage inventory, but the prices were very distressed and nobody wanted to sell into that kind of market.
Yeah.
And they were sort of based on this funding structure that was very short term because it was cheap. It was 24-hour loans for the most part that had to be renewed every day. So they were very vulnerable to the vicissitudes of the market.
Right. I mean, without a doubt, you would say that aggressively this was a huge miscalculation, not only for Bear Stearns management, but also maybe for the entire industry?
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, I do think there was denial all around. I think Bear Stearns management could have done a lot more to prepare for this kind of onslaught.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I can't see them surviving 2008. I mean, they might have been able to buy a few more weeks or months,
sure,
or a more sort of reasoned deal-making process with somebody who ultimately bought them, which was J.P. Morgan in this case. But they really were not diversified enough. They weren't conservative enough to really last through last year, as was the case with Lehman Brothers or Merrill Lynch.
Right. We were starting a money jar here. We were thinking about picking up Bear Stearns ourselves around the broadcast building. All right. So tell us, Kate. Yeah, we were taking up donations.
At $2 a share, why not? Right?
We were, for crying out loud. We were like, okay, let's start searching the couches for change and stuff. We gotta come up with the money somehow, Kate, is what we were thinking. All right, so take us inside Bear's walls during the final frenzied 72 hours as an independent firm.
All right, so we had mayhem basically. I mean, Thursday night, the top brass of the firm gets together in a conference room. Literally, they have their treasurer with like a legal pad where he has jotted down their cash position as best he can reckon at the end of the day, and it looks incredibly ugly. He's got under $3 billion to work with, which is not enough to open on Friday morning.
Wow.
And through the course of the weekend, I mean, basically overnight, the Fed decided to extend them an emergency loan through J.P. Morgan because at that time, as you know, investment banks were not able to borrow directly from the Fed. They didn't have access to the discount window yet, so that was what got them to Friday morning. Friday, the market absolutely kills them. Their stock is cut in half. Hedge fund clients are pulling out billions of dollars in balances, and they're like, oh, my God, how are we going to get through the next couple of days?
Right.
Alan Schwartz, their CEO, gets a phone call on his way home to Greenwich, Connecticut from Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary, and Tim Geithner, who at that point is running the New York Fed Bank, and they say, look, you got to have a deal by Sunday, pal.
Right.
Alan's shocked, but Alan has been in the midst of this crazy tsunami that I think he didn't see coming. So he gets together Saturday morning with his CFO. J.P. Morgan sends people over. They start their due diligence. They have Chris Flowers, the private equity investor, in the office. They're calling Deutsche Bank. They're calling Goldman Sachs. They're calling everyone they can think of who might be interested to try to get a deal done. And it's just mayhem. It's racing around the office, making copies, making phone calls, talking to the Fed. Chinese food and pizza spread out in the conference room, starting to smell after a while.
Right.
I mean, It was, as you would imagine, a crazy weekend.
Can you imagine just the beads of sweat rolling off the heads of these people, figuring out, and then ascertaining, coming to the realization that, you know what, this is a big, big problem. I mean, it has to have been unbelievably humid in those meeting offices. right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure the flop sweat was covering people just as it covers me when I'm on a deadline. But,
right.
I mean, their deputy treasurer goes home Thursday night to maybe catch an hour of sleep.
Right.
After 1 hour, he gets a call at like 3 in the morning from one of his colleagues saying, you got to come right back in. I mean, that was the tone of it.
All right.
And it must have just been devastating and shocking for these guys because in spite of their sharp elbows and their street fighter culture, it was very much of a family atmosphere inside. And a lot of the people in my book had worked at Bear for literally like 20 years, 30 years. It was all they knew.
Right.
A lot of their net worth was tied up in the stock, and they were just devastated.
It was their life. All right, so for decades, Bear, and let's talk about some of the people in there. Bear had probably recruited PSDs. Now, explain to all of our viewers out there what PSDs are, and how did they benefit themselves and also Bear Stearns?
A PSD was the type of person that Bear wanted to recruit, and the letters stand for poor, smart, and a deep desire to be rich.
Right.
So in other words, we don't care about the pedigree, we just care about the attitude and the ability to make money.
Right.
And Bear was famous for hiring some people that were actually cast-offs of other firms because they'd had, say, regulatory run-ins or other problems, but they were talented traders, and Bear saw that and would bring them on board anyway. So they really didn't care very much about appearances. That was one of the things about them.
Sure.
On the other hand, they were an interesting place where only Bear Stearns, of all the major firms on the street, certainly, and maybe beyond, had a requirement that you had to give 4% of your income to charity if you were at the senior level, and they checked people's tax returns. So it was this contrast of a philanthropic spirit with sort of an edgy attitude, and in the end, unfortunately, it didn't serve them very well.
Right. All right. So I wonder, I mean, it almost sounds to me that's the making of an entrepreneur, a lot of those people, PSDs that they brought in there. And I wonder how well they're doing outside of that. Now, on to the last question here today. Bear survived crises from, the Great Depression to the dot-com bubble, yet the subprime mortgage crisis crushed them. How did this happen ultimately? What is the end story on this?
Well, it was a cascading chain of events, and really I think it started with overexposure to the mortgage sector. Then they had 2 hedge funds that blew up in 2007, partly as a result of exposure to subprime mortgages.
Yeah.
That wasn't a huge financial loss, but it was a symbolic blow to the company.
Right.
And it started to change people's thinking about whether they were savvy risk managers or not. Their CEO, Jimmy Kane, comes under fire. He's regarded as being distracted and not engaged in the day-to-day, and it sounds like he really wasn't. I mean, he was delegating a lot of authority to a couple other guys.
Yeah.
They fire their top trader, who was always the heir apparent to Jimmy, so now they don't even have a succession plan.
Yeah.
They get into early '08. The macro picture is worsening. They're the smallest of the major investment banks, and there you have it. I mean, it was a really incredibly quick come down for them, and in the final analysis, they really did unravel in 72 hours. So I think it's a cautionary tale about what can happen and what did happen last year on Wall Street.
Right.
I think there was resonance for other firms that face challenges, and now, unfortunately, we're in the phase of this crisis where I think individuals are really hurting because of unemployment and credit card debt and many other factors.
Right. All right. This is a weed in the herd, and look at Lehman's, too, by the way. All right, so I guess I have a PS to my last question. Who's going to be left standing, and does it look like there's some strength there on Wall Street with who's left standing?
Yeah, actually I think there is. I mean, I've been reporting on first quarter earnings, and they've been stronger than expected in many cases.
Yeah.
And, if you look at, say, Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, these guys are making a fortune right now trading interest rate products. I mean, treasuries, currencies, anything connected to interest rates, they're doing incredibly well. Goldman's, they tie together fixed income, currency, and commodities, but that unit of their business, I think I'm remembering this correctly, made like $6.5 billion in the last quarter, which is pretty awesome. So
that is.
There are some bright spots, and I do think that in the macro picture, things are starting to turn around. Hedge funds are having a fairly good year so far,
nice.
4.2% upside returns based on a recent story that we had. Unemployment is slowing, but at the same time, it's predicted to go up to 10%.
Kate, we're out of time. We're out of time. I'd love to have you on again. Kate Kelly, folks, Street Fighters, the last 72 hours of Bear Stearns. The toughest firm on Wall Street is the title of the book. Kate, where can we find it? Barnes & Noble, Amazon?
Absolutely. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Penguin.com, bookstore near you.
All those fantastic sites. And bookstores. Kate Kelly, thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, there you have it, folks. Kate Kelly, Street Fighters.